Welcome to this webinar on advanced influencing. I'm actually going to share my screen with you right now. There we go. So hopefully you'll be able to see that. So my name's Marcus Corah, and I'm going to be running this webinar for you today. Now, some of you may know Raise the Bar and have worked with us before, and some of you may be new to Raise the Bar. If you are new, then welcome, and obviously if you've already worked with us, then welcome back. Before I start delivering any content on advanced influencing, I wanted to take about 20 or 30 seconds of your time just to tell you a little bit about what we at Raise the Bar do. You see, we're passionate about inspiring people to be the very best that they can be. So we run a wide variety of programs and workshops to help companies and individuals develop and reach their full potential. We're also one of the country's leading speaker bureaus, with subject matter experts in a wide range of fields and on a wide range of topics, which means that our clients receive the latest cutting-edge thinking. And with that in mind, what I wanted to do was start this webinar for you. So we're going to look at advanced influencing and really delve into a couple of subjects. We've got 30 minutes of content for you, minutes of Q&A. If you haven't already seen it, there is a box at the top right-hand corner of this webinar page, which will allow you to ask questions. So you can go ahead and click on that, click on the button, and you can ask questions at any point during this webinar. We're not going to deal with any questions until we get through all of the content, and then I'll be looking at them. So today we're going to be really talking about how we can work with our clients' values and really understand their values. And we're also going to be looking at language patterns. These are some useful ways of constructing or shaping the language that you're using to really help you increase your ability to influence. So let's start at the beginning. And actually where I'm going to start here is I'm going to talk about two types of influence that most people are familiar with, or certainly one type, which is the sort of top-down influencing, I'm the authority here, you need to listen to what I'm going to tell you. Now, when you use this top-down influence, when you use this my badge says I'm more senior to you way of influencing, it kind of works quite a lot of the time, but it's not 100%. And one of the challenges that I think that this type of influencing has is that it tends to create resistance because you're using an authoritative approach to create or change people's behavior or attitude. So what I wanted to talk about was a different type of influencing. And that type of influencing is influencing through understanding. Because for me, when you use influence through understanding, there's much less resistance to your ideas. There's much less resistance to the message and the influence that you're trying to convey. And certainly from my perspective, I think it's more consistent in terms of its ability to influence. So, how does influence through understanding work? Well, it's actually very straightforward, because for me, if you want to influence people powerfully, then you need to understand how those people see the world, what their map of the world actually looks like. And when you are able to see what their map looks like, when you're able to understand what their map looks like, then it gives you a real opportunity to influence from within their worldview, from within the way that they see the world. And when you're influencing from within the way they see the world, from their current map, it enables you to create much less resistance, because how can they resist their own way of seeing the world? So that's one of the really important things that we really need to take away from working this influencing technique through understanding. Now, there are two things you really need to understand. The first thing is the business side of someone's map. And then the second thing is the personal side of their map. Because when you understand them from a business perspective, obviously you understand the business side. But when you understand them from the personal perspective, it gives you a much greater influencing ability, because you can then use the business and the personal together in combination. So what we're looking at really is, what are the business drivers, what are the business opportunities, what are the business objectives, but also from the personal side, what are their values, what are their beliefs, what are their past experiences. Now, beliefs and past experiences are a very big area, and we only have half an hour today. So I'm going to suggest that we just focus on values, because if you really want to influence people very, very powerfully, understanding and working within their map through understanding their values, both personally and their business values, gives you a fantastic opportunity to really influence them. So that's what we're going to focus on today. We're going to talk about working within people's values, value set, to reduce resistance to the ideas that you want to present and influence them with. So to start off, let's look at this. I'm going to suggest that really we have day-to-day values, and at the other end of the scale, we have lifetime values. Our day-to-day values are the things that are important to us on a daily basis, and our lifetime values are things that are important to us across our life. So my question would be this: which do you think has the greatest impact? Which of these two extremes gives you the greatest opportunity to influence other people? I'm going to suggest, as a generalization, that the day-to-day values have less ability to influence people because they're more short-term. And what I mean by that is that what was important to me last week isn't necessarily going to be important to me next week or next month or next year. But my lifetime values are going to be important to me throughout my whole life. And so there's much greater potential to influence people when you focus on their lifetime values. Now, let me give you a story that kind of sets up this idea a little bit. So a while ago, and it was a while ago now, I got a cold call from a prospect asking me if I could help him, and his name was Paul, if I could help him and his company win some more business. He was interested in sales training. And we chatted about what he was looking for and what his current situation was. So I'm really trying to understand where he is at from a business perspective. What kind of sales training has his team had? What kind of sales training might he be interested in? What problems is he trying to solve, etc., etc. And at some point during this conversation, I turned around and I said on the phone, I said, Paul, are you familiar with working with people's values? And he paused for a moment. He said, I'm not sure, because it's been a long time since I've done any sales training. Is it possible for you to tell me what you mean by that? And at this point, I said, well, let me ask you a question. And my question is this: what's important to you about getting this sales training? And he turned around and he said, I want my team to be able to effortlessly raise money. Now, in that moment, unbeknownst to Paul, he had given me his values. And they weren't just his company or project values. They were more getting into the realms of personal values. You see, for me, day-to-day values tend to be more business focused, more project focused, whereas the life values, the things that are important to us throughout our lives, tend to be much more personal. So when Paul said, I want my team to be able to effortlessly raise money, I think he was slightly over the line into the life/personal values, because he had already told me what the project or business values were. He wants them to have better conversations. He wants them to be able to be on, not on broadcast, to be able to actually engage with the prospects that he's talking to, the investors he's talking to. So he's given me, we've had the chat about the project and business values, and by asking him what was important to him about the sales training, I'm now getting a personal value. And that was a really important point. Now, what I can then do with that piece of information, and it's exactly what I did do, is I said, well, listen, if you want your team to be able to effortlessly raise money, how will you know when they're doing that? What actually has to happen? And this is where the story unfolded, and we broke down what his values about effortlessly raising money were actually all about. And where we got to was, he wanted them to be able to build deeper rapport. He wanted them to be able to be much more in the moment. He wanted them to ask better questions and listen better. And so, having given me the detail of what effortlessly raising money looked like for him, now all I have to do is say, well, if those are the things that you really want, if you don't want to be on broadcast, if you want to be better at rapport, if you want to help your team to ask better questions and listen better, let me tell you about the kind of tools, the kind of skills that I can offer up to you. And that's exactly what we did. And he turned around and he said, basically, Marcus, you need to come in and see me. So within a week, I was in his office, and he said, right, I really love what you're talking about. And I said, Paul, let me say this. I want you to just realize that everything that I'm going to talk about today is all about how I can help your team effortlessly raise money. And he sat there and he just smiled at me and he said, Marcus, I knew you were going to say that, and I'm excited you're here. Because here's the thing, when you're talking about things that are really important to the other side of the table, to your clients, to your prospects, it could even be your teams, when you're talking about things that are important to them, they're listening and they're engaged, because you're holding them in a very powerful, positive, emotional place. You're holding them in a resourceful, emotional state. And that's what I was doing when I was talking about values. So that's a little story that kind of sets up the difference between project and personal values. Now let's look at a couple of keys to eliciting values, and then we'll get on and look at how we actually elicit them. And it's very easy to do. There are a couple of things you need to know. Number one, when you hear someone's values, you have to make a note of their exact words. Effortlessly raising money was Paul's values. If I change that, I interpret it in some other way, it's not his values. And secondly, values tend to be context specific. Really, on a day-to-day, they're much more context specific, and you need to check in. When you get to lifetime about people wanting to be successful, success can map across in different areas around the business. But as a generalization, I'm going to say that values really tend to be context specific. So don't assume if you get a value in one area that it's going to map across to another area. Alrighty, so here's how you elicit someone's values. In an overt way, all you're going to do is you're going to say what's important to you about, and you're going to name a context. With Paul, I said, Paul, what's important to you about getting this sales training? And he gave me his answer. I want my team to be able to effortlessly raise money. And that's it. I've got his values, and then I can take those values and use them to influence him, to sell to him, to create greater engagement, to get him excited about all of the opportunities that are coming his way. Everything that I want to do in terms of influencing is contained within that effortlessly raising money and helping him to achieve that. So that's a very overt way, and it's a very simple question. What's important to you about, and you name their values. The covert way of doing this is you're going to listen out for their values, and people will express their values during a conversation. If during that conversation you don't think you've heard someone say their values, so it might be your prospect, it might be a client, you can ask them an open question which allows you to elicit their values. And it might be a question like, so what are you looking to achieve from this activity that you're going to run? What are you looking to achieve from this product that we've got for you? And whatever they say, you're going to confirm whether or not it's their values by asking them, and is that the most important thing to you? And they will either say yes or no. So let me give you an example. What are you looking to achieve from this activity we're going to do for you? Well, we want you to increase our customer awareness, let's say that. We want you to increase our customer awareness of our product line. Okay, is that the most important thing to you? Yes or no? Yes, it is. Great, tick, move on. If they say no, all you're going to say is you're going to ask another open question, which is, so what is the most important thing to you? And they will then give you an answer. So either way, you get an opportunity to find out the values of the client that's sitting in front of you. So now we know how to elicit values. Let's talk about how we might attach them to a product, service, idea, anything that you want to do. The example that I'm going to give you here is going to help you to attach someone's values to a product, service, or idea with regard to a sale. And what I'm going to suggest is that you basically say, if you want, name their values, let us show you or tell you what we have that can help you to achieve this, and then you're going to name your features. And if you go back to what I talked about with Paul, we said something like this. If you want to name their values, which is help your team be able to effortlessly raise money by having better rapport, better conversations, spending less time on broadcast, then let me tell you how we can help you. First of all, let's talk about rapport. There's conscious and there's unconscious rapport. Rapport is an incredibly powerful influencing tool and is the absolute cornerstone of influence because it builds trust. This is what I'm going to teach your teams, and this is how they're going to be able to operate as a result of going through this training. And it just became a no-brainer because everything that I talked about is then linked to helping his team effortlessly raise money. And that's the power of working with values. Now, in the remaining sort of 10 minutes or so, I wanted to quickly touch on language patterns. I know we've gone through values pretty quickly. Hopefully there might be some questions coming up about values, and I'm happy to answer those. But I just wanted to touch on language patterns because language patterns are a very interesting concept. If you are not sure what that picture is, let me just say it's my interpretation of someone's brain. I know it looks like a tree that's been split in half, but it's basically my interpretation of someone's brain. And what we're going to talk about in this section is a very powerful concept. I'm going to say that our brains, and this is not necessarily true, but I'm going to say, and I'm going to use a metaphor to say that our brains are split into two halves. We have a conscious side of our brain and we have an unconscious side to our brain. Now, obviously, if you look into someone's head, you don't see a conscious and an unconscious side. It's a way of explaining the technique and the concept that I want you to grasp because this is the power that language patterns will give you. You see, when we communicate with other people, when we are having a conversation with them, when we are presenting to them or in a meeting or in any context, all the information that we're giving to them will go into their conscious mind. And in our conscious minds, we have that little voice in our head. And that little voice in our head is known as a counter argument. And it's the little voice in our head that says, hold on a second. Do I believe what I'm hearing? Does what this person's telling me fit in with my map of the world, with the way that I currently see the world? And if it doesn't fit in with the way that your client, prospect, or team, or whoever it is that you're talking to, if it doesn't fit in with the way they currently see the world, then the counter argument perks up and goes, this isn't true, this isn't right. And the information that they're receiving gets discarded. The information is blanked, is stopped in its tracks because of the counter argument kicking into action. So the point of language patterns, and this is why they are so powerful, and specifically in terms of influencing people, is that your language patterns allow you to implant a message directly into the unconscious mind of the listener. And in the unconscious mind, there is no counter argument. There is no way for their brain at an unconscious level to reject the information that it's hearing. Why? Because it doesn't have that capacity. So when a message arrives into the unconscious mind of the listener, it is accepted as being true, and therefore it is acted upon. And the language patterns that we are going to share in this next section, and there are only two, will allow you to bypass the conscious mind and implant your message directly into the unconscious mind of the listener. The first technique we're going to look at is known as pacing and leading. And pacing and leading is very, very simple and very, very straightforward. The basic premise of pacing and leading is that if I say something that's true for the audience, then I can lead them with a suggestion. And the key to pacing and leading is that I say something that is true for the audience 3 times, because my conscious mind, hearing 3 true facts, one after the other, switches off and accepts the lead, which is the suggestion that directly follows the 3 true facts as being true. And it's the lead that then goes into the unconscious mind of the listener or the audience or the prospect or the client. So let me give you an example of the kind of things that you can pace and lead. So these are pacing ideas. I can pace and lead your current experience. I can pace and lead your past experience. I can repeat back what you've heard, and I can even pace and lead the thoughts of that the audience might be having at this given moment in time. Now, I'm going to go through 3 examples for you so I know you've got this concept. Here's the first one. We're going to look at how you can pace and lead a current experience. Okay, so here's what I might say to you. As you listen to me talking about influencing on this webinar, you may find that it gives you some useful ideas about how you could become more influential in the future. Now, I'm going to break this down for you by saying, as you listen to me, that's a true fact. That's something that your conscious mind can't argue with. So you cannot put up a counter argument to that. Talking about influencing, another true fact, another pacing statement. It's something else that's absolutely true for you at this moment in time. Therefore, your conscious mind can't create a counter argument for it. On this webinar, again, true fact, a pacing statement. There's no counter argument that can be raised here. And the way that it's structured, the way that pacing and leading is structured is true fact, true fact, true fact, suggestion. And the suggestion is all couched or verbalized in possibility. You may find that it gives you some useful ideas about how you could become more influential in the future. I'm not saying that you will find that you're going to get brilliantly useful ideas as to how you can influence people, and that by next Tuesday you're going to be using all of these ideas. Why? Because that's going to alert your brain again. And what happens if you get to next Tuesday and you don't have, or you're not using these ideas? So your facts are facts, and your suggestion, your lead, that is much more about possibility and where it could go, not where it will necessarily go. The next example is pacing and leading their past experiences, with or without you. The example I've got here is with you. Here's my example. Last year, you gave us a budget of X, and we were able to produce Y. This year, you've given us a budget of Z. To build upon last year's results and create even greater engagement and opportunities by increasing your customer engagement. Here's how it looks in practice. Last year you gave us a budget of X. That's true for them. They might well have given you a budget of X. And we were able to produce Y. We were able to produce these results for you. That's going to be true for them as well. This year, you've given us a budget of Z. That's true again. And it's our aim to build upon last year's results and create even greater opportunities for you by increasing your current level of customer engagement by 10%, or whatever it is that you want to say. That's your suggestion. Now, here's the thing. Notice that they're increasing their level of customer engagement might be of value to them. So when you start to put the values into this, it increases the power of your suggestion. Finally, this is just an example of repeating back what you've heard. So I just want to confirm what you've said. You said, that's true. I just want to confirm what you said. That's exactly what you're about to do. So that's true. You're going to repeat back what they actually said. So you told me that you wanted your team to effortlessly raise money. And if I heard you correctly, that's also true because I've just repeated it back for you. Then let me say, and that then becomes the suggestion that you want them to take on board. And it's the suggestion that then goes directly into their unconscious mind, which is the thing that will become acted upon. So we're going to leave pacing and leading now. And in the last few minutes of this particular section, I know we've gone pretty quickly through this. I just wanted to talk to you very quickly about another concept, which is how you can use linking language. And linking language is language that allows you to string ideas together that wouldn't normally go together because you're using the language of the brain. You see, which means and because, those three words are how your brain makes meaning of things. And because of that, it puts you powerfully into the driving seat of influence when you start to use them, giving your language real power and much greater impact. And as you take time now to really get to grips with these concepts and the other concepts that we've talked about on this webinar, when you start to use them, it means you'll be able to dramatically increase the power to which you can influence others. Think about what we've talked about here today and how you might be able to apply these ideas not only as individual ideas, but also working together. Because when you do, your power to influence will go through the roof, which is why you're here, isn't it? Listening to this webinar, probably thinking about how you might be able to use these concepts. Because the more you do, the more answers you're likely to come up with. And that just means that you're already underway. Because awareness is the first step to mastery. And that little bit of language that I've just given you there was filled with which means and because. And it allowed me to create a river that you can just step into and become part of. And I can then start to link concepts together very, very powerfully and easily, because as I say, this is how your brain makes meaning of the world that it lives in. The other point that I just want to touch on was I ended with a pacing and leading statement. And if you spotted it, well done. If you didn't, here it is again. It started with, which is why you're here, isn't it? Listening to this webinar, probably thinking about how you might be able to use these concepts. Right, those are three pacing statements. And here's the lead, with a because. Because the more you do, the more answers you're likely to come up with. And that just means that you're already underway, because awareness is the first step to mastery. Alrighty, so technically we've done about 30 minutes, 31 minutes. So officially, thank you for listening to the content. I hope you got real value for it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen in a second so I can have a look at some questions that have been asked, and I'm going to start to ask those questions. Now, for some reason, there we go. Hopefully everybody can see me. Okay. Let me just quickly run through this. Sorry, I was going to quickly. Okay, I'm just looking at the questions that I've been asked. Could some say in examples raising money is more of an objective other than a value such as honesty and fairness? Okay, so there are a number of questions here. Here's a great one. I don't know who this is from. Is there a limit to how many linking language I should use? My answer is no. Use as many as you want to use. The more you use, the more powerful it becomes. So let me give you another example of how I might use linking language. I use it to set up what NLP is. For those of you that are familiar with NLP, it stands for Neuro-Linguistic Programming, and there are millions of definitions out there on the internet as to what NLP actually means. So I have a definition that uses a lot of linkage language so that I can take my audience, the delegates that are in the room with me, on a journey that makes it very easy to buy into what NLP actually means. So here's what I tend to say. I will say that for me, NLP is just sharing best practice. Because if you think about it, the founders of NLP, Bandler and Grinder, really modeled the very best of the best. They looked at what the very best of the best were doing, and they were able to break down, after a considerable amount of analysis, they were able to break down what they were doing into a process so that we could share it with everybody else. And the advantage to you, what that means to you, is that when you are in a training with me, I'm going to be sharing with you the very best ideas on influencing, the very best ideas on any given subject. And what that means is that you're shortcutting the amount of time that it takes for you to be successful, because you don't have to make all the mistakes that everybody else has made or that you could make, because you're learning from the very best of the best. You're standing on the shoulders of the giants that have come before you. And when you do that, you shortcut the amount of time that it takes for you to be successful. So that's just a quick example of how you can use that. I got another question here. Can you use these ideas in negotiations? Absolutely. For me personally, I think if you are talking about people's values in a negotiation, it makes it much harder for them to beat you down on price. So I totally think you can use these on negotiations as it stands. Okay, there's a question here. Does it depend on the situation whether I should use covert or overt techniques? Again, I like covert techniques. That's just the way I am. I always invariably get to an overt technique if I need to, but otherwise I'm going to give a totally covert way of eliciting values. Let me give you an example. We were on a call with a client the other day, and the client was basically calling up to run through a schedule of an outline for a training. And they just wanted some reassurance about a few things. So I said, so what do you want to get from this call? What do you want to understand about the training outline that you don't currently understand? And the client said, I just want to make sure that it's going to be really interactive. Now, what I've done now, I don't need to say, so is interaction the most important thing to you? I don't need that. That's just going to be a given. So now what I'm going to do is, when I'm working through all of the content that we're delivering in the training, I'm just going to say, this is how this piece is interactive. This is how this piece is interactive. This is how this piece is interactive. So that they're getting the information that they need in a way that's meaningful and important to them. So I'm a big fan of the covert, and I always go to overt if I'm not sure. Okay, let's just see what other questions we've got. Do you have a more comprehensive session on this course? Absolutely. That's Jacqueline. Yes. Speak to anybody at Raise the Bar, and we can talk to you about that. Usually I do around, say, 3 or 4 hours on values, and language patterns can be a good half an hour to an hour itself. So there are lots of ideas to talk about. You can, one of the things that's really useful with values, just so that you know, is not only eliciting prospects' values, clients' values, but also your team's values, or even your own personal values around work. We often elicit teams' values around work so that they are, because if those values are met, the team is going to be more motivated, more passionate, more committed, more inspired to be working. One of the things that happens quite a lot is when people become demotivated and uninspired. Not all the time, but a lot of the time it's because the things that are really important to them, their values, are not being met in that situation. So something to think about. What are your thoughts on practicing this? Any tips, examples? Steve, yes, thank you for that question. Okay, very quickly. I guess my top tip is this: get out and have fun with it. I am eliciting people's values quite a lot of the time, and it's usually very covert. Like everything, practice makes perfect. But awareness is the first step to mastery. So now you know about these ideas, just getting out there and having a go with them will absolutely take you to the next level. 2 big tips for you, Steve. Number 1, when you're eliciting a value from a client or a prospect or a team member, please be aware that the answer that they will give you might not be in their conscious awareness. And one of the first times that I elicited a value from somebody, it took them about, it was a long time, probably 20 to 30 seconds to actually come back with their answer. And in that 30 odd seconds, it was incredibly painful to sit there in the silence. There were 4 of us in the room. I'd asked, or I was eliciting the values of the most senior person who was going to commission the training, and they went silent. And after a while, I pretended to make some notes and kind of went off and doodled on a sketch pad because the silence was so long and excruciating, as I say. But hold off, don't fill the silence, let them, they've gone off basically on an internal search, so let them go off on that internal search and let them come out with an answer. And of course, as soon as they came out with the answer, and I think in that case, if I'm right, we got something like, is it ready to go? Is it, how finished is your program? So all we then had to do is say, our program is ready to go, and here's why. Ding, 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 ding. So then I've just attached her values to our program. The other thing that you really need to know, so length of time is one thing. I think the other top tip is, and I think this is, if I may be so bold, and I'm sure you won't do this, Steve, but it's just a quick thing. I think it's fair to say that it's when you realize the power of this question and what it unleashes for you, the what's important to you question, and what that power gives you in terms of influencing, it's really important that you don't make a big deal of that question, and that it just becomes part of all of the questions that you're asking the client in a sort of general context of, hey, how's it going today? How's business? What's happening? Etc., etc., etc. And then you get to them and you might be talking about a project, for example. And you say, so what's really important to you about this project that we're about to run for you? And they will give you an answer. So it just becomes part of the conversation you're having with them, rather than this, right, I've got to elicit the values now. And as soon as you do that, kind of making a big deal about it, it kind of, it sets a bit of a tone for the question, and I think people's then conscious mind kind of sparks up and goes, whoa, what's going on here? Why are they making such a big deal about this question? So be very natural and use it, the what's important to you question, as just part of who you are and the questions that you're asking the client anyway. What you're looking to do, obviously, as we've already discussed, is just fill in their map with a little bit more detail. So you've got the personal side, which is the values, and then you've got the company side, which might be company values, project values, other things that you're going to talk to them about anyway. Another quick question, can we get the slides? As far as I'm aware, this webinar is being recorded. I hope so anyway. And that means that it will be live and you'll be able to watch it as much as you like. I will check with Raise the Bar about the slides. I'm happy for you to have them. Which brand uses the best influencing techniques to change spending habits? That's a great question, Steve. That's you. Okay, which brand uses the best influencing techniques? Do you know what? I think most of them do. A lot of brands use a lot of very, very powerful techniques to sell to us and to influence our decision making, everywhere from in-store to TV commercials. I could cite a quick example, way off topic, great thing to explore if you're interested. And the thing I'm going to talk about is something in psychology, and I think it's known as repetition break structure. It's incredibly powerful. It's very, very close, by the way, to pacing and leading, very, very close to pacing and leading. And it's an incredibly powerful technique, and it's worth looking into. So, Steve, if you're interested in that, a couple of brands use that technique, very, very powerful. Right, next question. If you had one tip for influencing effectively, what would it be? Understand people's map. If you really want to influence people, you have to understand where they're at. You have to understand what motivates them, what inspires them, what makes them feel good, what they're passionate about, what they want to get out of life. And what you want to do is you want to help them to believe that they can have that. Because when people believe, genuinely believe that you can help them to have the things that they most care about, your power to influence them goes through the roof. So I'm going to say that. Jacqueline, you said great, thank you, absolute pleasure. Any more questions? I'm liking presentations. Could some say in examples, raising money is more an objective rather than a value? Well, okay, so I think, so this is from Martin. Hey, Martin. You say, I'm liking the presentation. Could you say in some examples that raising money is more of an objective rather than a value, such as honesty or fairness? It's actually about understanding where the other people are and what they want. So I totally get your question, and in your map, that's absolutely right for you. With regard to my client, Paul, at that case, his values were all around helping his team effortlessly raise money. And once I had that piece of information, I could pretty much take it anywhere, and we could pretty much do anything with that. And we had a very long, healthy relationship with that particular client. So I hope that answers your question. I think that might just about be it. I think that's about it, which is perfect timing because it is now 1:44 and 31 seconds. So just on behalf of me and Raise the Bar, thank you all for tuning in, for listening. I hope you've got real value from this. Values, as I say, are a pretty big subject, and we've skipped across the top. It's probably worth going back and listening again to pick out some of the nuggets that you might have missed on the first time round. So go back and listen to this webinar again. Just a final thing, when you start combining values with pacing and leading and linking language, your ability to influence will absolutely go through the roof. So thank you very much. I was Marcus Corah. This is a Raise the Bar webinar on advanced influencing. Until next time, take care and goodbye.